Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Pagabo Live Pavilion this afternoon. We are delighted to host an In Conversation panel this afternoon with Dobson, who runs a property business for Network Rail. And we have Lord Peter Hendy of Richmond Hill, CBE, here to answer a few questions. Robin will have a few questions he's going to run through. It's a very much in conversation. We're looking for can't say that word. Join in from the audience, as much as Lord Hendy may disagree with that. Please feel free, hold your questions until Robin brings you in, but I'll hand you over to Robin and Lord Hendy. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for joining. Peter, a bit of flattery, so we're going to read out your CV, which is going to take quite a while, but obviously formerly chair of Network Rail from 2015 and of the London Legacy Development Corporation from 2017. And from prior to that, he was Commissioner of Transport for London for nearly 10 years, including being responsible for transport for the Olympic and the Paralympic Games in 2012. He was made a life peer in 2022, having been knighted in 2013. And your entire career has been in the world of transport, having joined London Transport in 1975. So that's a sort of an astonishing history, and also a huge amount of delivery within that. What I was going to say, just from a personal perspective, before we open it up just to questions, was Peter. I had the great fortune of actually working with Peter, and was a big inspiration as to why I joined to run the property business for Network Rail just over 3 years ago. You have an extraordinary and rare to me combination of actually being able to join infrastructure projects, complicated infrastructure projects, I might add. All of them are complicated, with both property but also with investment. Obviously, the highlight being the 2012 Olympic Games. But also, as I witnessed firsthand, a real enabler of both people, of partnerships, and importantly, about performance and just getting stuff done. And I think we'd all agree on one thing at UKREiiF: we just want to get more stuff done at pace and at scale. So, extraordinary in terms of the people that you've worked with. Obviously, you also worked with, through the GLA, through Ken Livingstone's time, and obviously was one of the few people that also went and worked with Boris too, and obviously now working with the Secretary of State, Heidi Alexander. So just to kick it off, what experiences from your time at Network Rail and Transport for London have influenced how you see the development of railway land?
Right, so thanks Robin, that's a very nice introduction. First thing I'd say is please call me Peter, because if you call me Lord Hendy, I look round for my brother, who is Lord Hendy. He looks more like Lord Hendy than I do. So that's just by the way. Look, I think the first thing to say is that actually transport is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. So connectivity drives growth, jobs and homes, and the reason why people invest in transport, the reason why people want it to work properly, is because getting people to and from work, their life, education, health and so on, is actually absolutely crucial. So, and I think one of the problems, certainly with the railway industry in the last 30 years, is it's so hard to make it work that most of the people in it forget what it's really for. And if you go to any industry gathering, people will tell you all sorts of stories about how difficult it is to get anything done, but most of them won't relate to why people want connectivity and why people want better connectivity. And I think that's really sad, and that's what my passion about railway reform is, because the railway needs to stop having 30 people discuss whether or not you can move a signal post for 3 feet, and start having 30 people discuss what the railway in towns and cities across Britain can deliver for the community and for the economy. And that will only come through railway reform, and that's why I'm there, because I got fed up waiting for the last government. And when I got asked whether I'd like to be the rail minister in this one, I said, yep. Didn't tell the wife either till afterwards. That didn't go well, but it's all right. I'm still here. So look, that is an overall picture. Now, when you get to these big corporations that run, I mean, the difference actually between TfL and Network Rail is TfL was a complete organisation, and I think it demonstrates, and it demonstrated in my time, before my time, and still now demonstrates what an integrated transport organisation can deliver for the city. And I think that we in TfL in my time, and subsequently, understood why the city needed good transport and why it needed transport infrastructure development, and then developing our land became very easily part of that equation. In terms of the National Railway Network, Network Rail, well, when I went there in 2015, it was just recovering from being nationalised. Andrew Haynes, who's retiring later this summer, more sensible than I am at the age of 60, but Andrew's made a big change in it, and he's changed it to be regionalised with people with as much responsibility as you can give them in a balkanised railway. But Network Rail's traditional approach to property development was by and large selling land. Not always, but and the old British Rail was rather better in some cases, and had done some pretty good station refurbishments in its and redevelopments in its time. But Network Rail was rather more about selling assets than it ever was about doing big delivery. So I think we've changed that. I mean, Robin is one of the results of that. We've also, I should keep saying we, but it's a habit of 9 years while I was there. They have incentivised regional managers to get some reward from property development, because it is easier. It's always easier if you're operating a railway to operate the railway than it is to tolerate a load of people with grand ideas about building coming to do it right next to your railway line. So actually you need some incentivisation. So Network Rail now incentivises the regional managing directors who get a reward for development on Network Rail land, which is good. And that's sort of where we got to now. And then, well, let's move on and see talk about where we're going next.
Yeah,
How about
and
that?
I think you can, I think one of the marvellous things is having Peter as an advocate for both property but also for transport in everything we're doing. I think many of you may have seen there was a recent government announcement in March to set up a new property company, which is focused particularly on rail regen, and you'll have heard all of the noise about building much more around stations and on brownfield land. And that's a combination of both Network Rail property development side and also LCR businesses. Obvious question is, what excites you? And it's been quite a long time in the making, that partnership and coming together.
So one of the best things about my old job at Network Rail as chair was that I had a bit of time to bring people together in cases where we could create something, but only with, I mean, property development seems to me generally to be collaborative. You can't do it all on your own. You've got to bind the planning authorities. But in places like, in cases like York Central, Bristol Temple Quarter, and a number of others, you're only going to get it done if you can align various interested parties, which include the planning authorities, include combined authority mayors when there is one, include not only Network Rail but the rest of the railway and private sector developers. And one of the things I discovered is that some people who make things work are more likely to respond to my invitation than they might have been to his or somebody else's. Well, that's fine if they need me to convene the meeting. But I think that, I used to do that 1 or 2 days a week. It suited me down at the ground because it meant that Andrew could get on with running the organisation without me interfering with what he did. And we made some things happen, I think. But then the limitation of Network Rail property is that Network Rail has no right to develop beyond the railway boundary. Whereas LCR, as was the deliverers of St Pancras and Stratford and other places, actually LCR does have the right to develop beyond the railway boundary, but now is a shell of itself, because St Pancras is finished and gone, Stratford's finished and gone. It's there with its powers, but not much else. So putting those two things together, I think, is quite powerful. So you get a property company which people can recognise is not old railway full of people saying, oh, I don't think you can do that more than less than 6 feet for the railway line. You get people who want to push the boundaries out, and can assemble parcels of land, and very importantly to get into joint ventures with third parties, because one thing doesn't change, which is that there isn't any money in the railway, so you always need somebody else's money to do the development, which is absolutely fine. And I'm really looking forward to this. I'm sad that it hasn't been fully announced. It will get round to being fully announced one day, but since it's been announced enough for us to tell you what it's going to do, that's fine by me. And I think Robin is acting as though it is announced, which is great, because what we actually need to do is to use this new body to actually propel further development. And bear in mind that the highest densities, both of housing and of commercial space, always ought to be on top of transport hubs. You know, people will say to us, well, why aren't you like Hong Kong and Japan? It's slightly unfair, because actually the Japanese privatised railways are actually property companies that happen to run a railway, not railways that have a bit of land left. But the principle is there. So, and Robin, I don't think, needs much encouragement to look at large-scale density of either or both commercial and housing around stations. And the new joint venture, will make it easier to do business with and develop more. Sorry, I can't spit it out fast enough. But so I think all that's good. It doesn't mean that Network Rail isn't interested in the smaller pieces of land, and it doesn't mean it isn't interested in other people using parts of its land if they've got a big development to do. But I really do think that this new venture will make a real difference, Robin. And what I've already seen, or what I saw before I left actually, and I still know it's going on, is the further identification of some quite large sites which actually have always been in railway ownership, have never really surfaced because they've been in some way difficult to deal with. They've got no access or limited access, or they're contaminated in some way. But a fresh look at those with private sector involvement, I think will do us really rather well.
Thank you, Peter. I think I'll do one last question, and then hopefully we'll just open it up to the floor. I was going to say, just again, just to recognise in the sort of short 3 years of working with you, Peter was an absolute catalyst of bringing projects like York to fruition, which is now on site, Bristol, Old Oak Common, Newcastle, many of the projects now that are on site and delivering homes. 4,500 homes got delivered last year in the property business in its own right, so huge. I also say it with a sort of some scars, having lived through. I mean, all of this land is not easy. So when you sort of arrive at Rail and say, give us the land, it's easy, we can do a better job of it. The reality is all of it is broadly classed as operational land, and it has to be declassified. For many of those in the room that we work with, you'll know the pain, but also the gain in order for us to get there. I mean, what more do you know it ever so well, what more do you think we could collectively do, be it government or all the other parts of government, collectively, be it DFT or HMT, to accelerate that? Because that's something I always get. How do we accelerate more land into being delivered, be it directly or through partnerships?
So one of the things I do about once a month is to write to Robin, normally on a Sunday evening, and say, where's the joint venture with Homes England? If people know how I operate, once I ask a question, I never give up until I've got a decent answer to it. And the answer is actually you don't need a joint venture with Homes England, but you do clearly need to bring two arms of government together in order to produce a better result than each of them separately. And I think with Eamon Boylan there, I think there's some movement there.
There is indeed, yeah.
Forget the signed agreements. What you need is the working arrangement that allow things to be liberated and to happen. So that's one thing. Secondly, Robin can't stray too far from the operational railway. You have to make it worth people's while to want to do this. And not only have I got some scars through Network Rail, but of course much earlier I can remember the development of Westfield at Shepherd's Bush on top of the Central Line sidings, and whatever you think of TfL, and it's a wonderful organisation, those people on the underground, they couldn't have given us stuff about Westfield. They were absolutely determined that their train sat in those bloody sidings every night, and it was absolute murder because they had no incentive to do any different. You know, if somebody suddenly comes and says, you've got a nice set of sidings in W12, but we want to put a concrete raft above it, and we want to do endless possessions and closures, there's quite a lot of people on the railway say, oh yeah, but but I'm not interested in the result. So you have to have a bit of incentive there, actually. One of the incentives that Robin has worked out, which is right, is that in some places at least, one of the incentives is to get a better station out of it. So, you know, amongst the controversy at Liverpool Street are a great set of railway people who really like a better station. That place is quite full. In fact, it's now it's UK's busiest station, and it's pretty packed out. And the people who run it are suddenly quite interested in development. At Euston, famously, you know, it's not unsafe, but it isn't very nice. The people who run Euston would desperately like a new station. It is full of people, and it's really hard to run. I've made a fuss with him, and he was taking it on about Victoria, which is horrible. It's the worst big station in London. It deserves, the people who use it deserve something better, and the bloody people who run it want something better too. And then Waterloo, which actually is better than it was in 1920, but it's not as good as it should be in 2020. And we need to do something there as well. So it's not only buy-in from the people who need to do the development, it's buy-in from the railway to want to make it happen, and I think that's really important. If we adopt the right approach, give people in the railway some modest incentives, get private sector developers to buy in with their money, take the risk of doing things next to the railway very carefully, because it is risky working next to the railway. You know, if you want to build a shed out there, you just go and buy a shed and build it. But if you want to build a shed within 6 feet of the running lines, you probably need a possession. You'll need all sorts of people in orange. You'll need people waving flags and all that sort of stuff, and it costs a load of money. So actually, you've got to buy in those people too. But I think, 3 years, you're learning how to do it, aren't you?
Some sense feels like 33, but no, and I think that's, to me, I couldn't agree more. To me, it's about, you know, actually the role that rail plays is as much as an enabler of people, of approvals, of getting stuff done, as well as actually potentially building stuff. So whether we talk the large stuff like Liverpool Street Station, which we'd all like you to support, Katrin, I think we've got an opportunity to support that's going through planning later this year, but equally so the smaller housing sites as well. So look, if that's okay, Ben, you've got a rolling mic, whatever a rolling mic is, but you've got feet on it. Questions, look, they're coming thick and fast, look, Peter. Look.
Hi, I'm Andrew Osborne. I'm from Ashford Borough Council down in Kent. We're very fortunate to have an international station on the high-speed 1 line with potential for greater development on Network Rail land around the station as well, quite a lot of service car park and everything else. So I suppose my question was around HS1, and are we exploiting enough out of that great bit of infrastructure, and do we need an international rail strategy as well to get Kent stations back open?
So
did everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
Looks like you did. Great.
So I've seen the proposition that we need an international rail strategy. I'm actually not sure we do, because strategies largely written by consultants. They're normally printed on glossy paper. You get 200 copies at a cost of about 20 quid a copy, and then they all get put in a drawer. What we need is some action, right? Because actually we need international trains to stop at Ashford, Ebbsfleet, and by the way, Stratford. Don't forget Stratford, because I was on that for 7 years at the LLDC. And there's a lot going on in that space currently, including the ORR's recent work on how many of a competitor's trains you can put into the depot at Temple Mills in East London, which is actually one of the factors, but the principal factor about competition. What I've said to all the competitors, and for that matter to Eurostar, is that if they want serious help from me personally, as well as the government, as part of their plans to run more services, some of them got to stop at those 3 stations. I think that's pretty reasonable. The other thing that's quite helpful is that Robert Sinclair, who's the managing director of HS1, who oddly comes from an airline, is the first person to realise since St Pancras opened that curious practice where they coop you up and then put you on a train at once, which is a sort of airline practice. It's a bit odd for a railway, because actually you could be on a train with a cup of coffee and a newspaper, and actually if you did that, you might be able to cope with more people in that space. I'm very supportive of what he's trying to do there as well. That does need funding and sorting out, but it is really important.
Hi, Fred Weisenborn from the Design Council. I guess the question we're all asking ourselves today is how can we make the most of the consolidated, unified rail service? And the question I suppose we have at the Design Council is what role should design play in that transition, in that pivot to Great British Railways, both in terms of rail infrastructure, user experience, and I suppose also community cohesion. So it's quite a big question, but I think it's an essential one because there's a real sense that Network Rail has, in the transition to Great British Railways, a real opportunity to provide value to users through design. And I was just wondering whether Lord Hendy had some reflections on that.
Well, I do, because actually one of the things that, I mean, this is not my prejudice, but the prejudice expressed by railway users through market research is that people hate the fragmentation of it. It's quite clear, and if you go back to the work that Keith Williams did about rail reform, way back, he finished it in 2021. That wasn't published till 2022. He found quite clear evidence that people want to regard the railway as a network, and you sort of do actually. I mean, I can't remember where I was going. I was going somewhere other than where Virgin went from Euston when it was all up the creek. And I went to speak to one of their people and said, I can't remember, I was going to Barrow-in-Furness or somewhere, don't know why. And I told the woman where I was going. She said, well, you're not one of our passengers then. That's a bit of a shame, isn't it, telling me that? But you know, that people hate that stuff. At TfL, you were always one of my passengers, whatever you used and wherever you went. And I was responsible in the end for what happened to you. And that concept of GBR, where GBR is responsible for your end-to-end journey on the railway, is really important. As part of that, actually, the only people who like the 2001 different colours that trains are painted are largely the managers who run them. Nobody else gives a stuff, actually. What they're interested in is consistent customer service. They're interested in understanding where they can go, what they can do. In my office, I brought it with me to the department. I've got my local station name, Richmond, in all varieties of station name types on the railway. There are 18 of them. They're all in different typefaces. Some of them reversed out. Some of them you can't read properly. Some of them would normally have adverts on the bottom. And actually, that's not very helpful. It's not very helpful if you know where you're going, but it's pretty terrible if you've got any sort of disability. My wife can't see very well, and it's never going to get better. And she can't read signs which are white out of blue or black. Network Rail's standard signage design until recently was yellow out of blue. She can't read any of them. That's really unhelpful, isn't it? You need to know where you're going, and actually that sort of consistency, that sort of basic consistency can actually just help people make better journeys. Now, when we said that, I think the other thing is that I would like to think that some of the results of what Robin is doing, especially in the bigger stations, would be some elegant architectural designs. If you leave railway engineers to their own, they don't half use some bloody great girders to do things, and normally leave them visible. And the old railway was rather better than that sometimes. So I do hope that we can do better. What I want is for your lovely drawings of places like Liverpool Street and Victoria to actually turn out like that in practice, you know?
Not to get value engineered down. I will just add something to what you've just said. I hope, certainly from a property perspective, we are sort of repositioning the business and have done over the last 3 years. So if you take the Liverpool streets, we mentioned Victoria, we talked Waterloo, but equally so we would take opportunities that we're doing in Bristol, Peterborough, Newcastle. I mean, extraordinary. 20 London boroughs we operate in and 40 towns and cities outside of London. But part and parcel of that is actually running some proper public consultation, some proper engagement that, to my knowledge, wasn't done properly perhaps pre 3 years ago, but actually to inform not just the environment, but also everything that goes on around it in terms of the communities. Because obviously most of the time people own their stations or feel like they want to own those stations as destinations.
And don't forget the historic railway estate, because that's pretty good too, actually. I'm immensely proud. It just happens to be my local station, but I'm really proud of what we've been able to do at Richmond, which is not a massive injection of cash, bankrolled or rather paid out because I use it every day. Actually, it was a collaborative venture between the local authority, who put in 6 figures, Railway Heritage Trust, and some mysterious, not reparations money, the other stuff that turns up occasionally from the train companies, bowels of the train companies. And it's really nice. It's a nice 30 station. It's got its bronze canopy at the front back, and it will shortly get the decent lighting and the ticket hall back. So we shouldn't forget that either.
More questions from the floor? There you go.
Hi, I'm Baroness Jo Valentine. I'm chair of Heathrow Southern Railway, and I'm also director of Business and Community, place director of Business and Community. Can I ask you both a sort of broad question and then a narrow question, taking you into the north a bit more? So now that HS2 bits of the north are not happening, is there anything either of you want to say about that? But specifically, Bradford Station, what advice do each of you have for those preparing the business plan for the new Bradford Station?
The government was left with a really shocking inheritance with HS2 generally. Firstly, because the project's in terrible condition, and Mark Wilde, who sorted out Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line, was very successful, has taken over. But there's a lot of work to do to sort out HS2, which to get it back under control. And you'll read, hopefully, you'll read more about that shortly. Bearing in mind currently the biggest civil engineering project in transport in Western Europe is not under control, it would be hard to persuade the Chancellor and the Treasury of large-scale plans for what you might do with what was the rest of HS2. But we are working on them quietly to work out what the best thing to do is and what the best order was. And the other inheritance, which is really unhelpful, is that neither the integrated rail plan for the north, which was done reasonably well, and Network North, which certainly wasn't, neither of them were prioritised, which is really unhelpful. So actually, in order to get stuff done, you need to know what's most important first. You don't promise everybody in Northern England everything and then deliver nothing, because that's not very helpful. So we're sort of working our way through that, and I think that you'll see more in the summer and autumn. It's affected by the spending review. Bradford in particular. So there's a great aspiration for a through station in Bradford to get to so that you can get from Leeds through Bradford to Huddersfield. There's a lot going on that. And I've talked to both the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, Tracy Braben, the Mayor, and Susan Hinchcliffe, who's the leader of Bradford, about it. I don't think much needs to be done, except they need to sort out which of the options they like, and they also need to work out then what the scale of development around the place actually is, and they preferably need to find some third parties to actually demonstrate that can be done with other than 100% public money. How's that?
I won't steal Peter's show, but just to say that from a property perspective, Regen, we have looked at Bradford, Manchester, Liverpool, and indeed Leeds. And use Leeds as an example. So we're the largest landowner in Leeds, next to the city. In Leeds alone, we were here last week, we think there's up to 10,000 homes and other associated mixed use, all of which is on Network Rail land, either bought through HS2 previous reasons, or because other sort of embedded issues around the rail, i.e., I'm not a rail person, but sorting out the bends that need to be straightened, therefore land gets bought, portion of it goes back to the rail, the rest comes into the sort of property and Regen. So Leeds is huge. Collectively, which includes Bradford, we think there's about 40,000. I use homes because that's obviously what we will talk about. But when I talk homes, I also talk regeneration in its widest sense. So we think there is a huge opportunity. Bradford has its own particular issues around sort of values versus land. So to Peter's point, it's more difficult to kickstart some of the stuff, but clearly, where there's a will, there's a way to get stuff done. Was that that was your wide question? Was that a narrow and a wide question we did?
You just need to say yes to the station, but I mean,
okay. Well, I'll say yes to the property. Peter can say yes to the station. Any more questions from the floor? We go.
So my question is also Bradford related, although we didn't didn't organise this. So I am effectively working on the case for the through station, and I think we at Bradford absolutely understand that, like what rail and connectivity can do for a place. So our ambition for Bradford is to be able to combine rail, tram connectivity and regeneration in that same space. So my question is, bearing in mind challenges that you often have with those kind of projects, what do we do this time round to make sure that that combination of rail, tram and also regeneration works really well?
I mean, I think we're in a good place because actually you need, as we've learnt in other places like York and Bristol and so on, what you need is all the people who've got either influence, land or money in the same place. So you need the combined authority mayor, you need the combined authority, you need the leader of the council, you need the council's regeneration people, you need Network Rail, you need the train companies to guarantee that they'll serve a station that you're going to build, and then you've got to get some sort of commitment, which is largely actually, I think, a local authority planning commitment to the sort of regen around the station. I think it would, some of the mechanisms that we would use in the south of England don't necessarily apply. If it was somewhere in the Greater London boundary, with any sort of scale of regen that you might be talking about, I'd say we'll build us a station, and that will do for the contribution. I don't think that's realistic in the case of Bradford because I don't think the values are there. But actually, the most important thing is to get everybody aligned on doing it. And my personal view is I don't see why this can't happen. It always takes longer than you think, and anything on the railway always costs more than you'd hope. But then the results are always better than you imagine too. So it's worth pursuing, isn't it?
Robbie, got a question. Can I throw a quick question in? I made. One of the things that in the repositioning of the property business that Peter you've helped us with over the last couple of years is we seem to have a huge amount of interest generated, exactly what you're talking about there, around investing in infrastructure. Infrastructure is a sort of investment sector in its own right, to either unlock commercial development or fundamentally just invest in good, sustainable infrastructure. Do you think there are lessons, Peter, both good lessons across the UK and particularly also other lessons in other countries that you would take that we could adopt here, or is it very bespoke to the UK?
Well, I'm not sure about the rest of the world. I mean, the Japanese privatised railways, as I said, are property companies with a railway attached, but then they were given the whole of the land of the railways when they were privatised. I've got a mate who runs UKREiiF. He's even older than I am, but in Japan, age is venerated, so he's treated with much more respect than I am. And he was just, when I was last there, which was a year last autumn, he showed me this extraordinary plan for what amounts to a new small city in Tokyo to house several 100,000 people and serious commercial content on what is the site of an entire marshalling yard in virtually in central Tokyo. We don't have that sort of opportunity. I mean, what I'd say is that actually the thing that I would like most is that if we can get out of the long-term infrastructure plan some sense about what the next things are that we want to invest in the railway. The one thing that's missing in Britain as a whole, which we had in London in spades, was that I used to tout a list round of the things that we were going to do with the transport network to private sector developers and say, well, if any of you would like to move these projects up the list, you come and see me separately, you put your money in and we'll move it up the list. The trouble is that in the world of the last few years in the railway, you haven't been able to do that until the day the project's announced. And the day the project's announced, everybody puts their hands back in their pockets because they're going to get it for nothing. I think the biggest scandal of HS2 is not actually that it's costing more than you might imagine. The biggest scandal is that when you roll into New Street and look at the skyline of Birmingham, it's full of cranes and buildings, and not one of them has put a penny into the railway. I think that's absolutely shocking, and I think that actually that is part of the partnership is actually realising the value that people are getting out of better connectivity, and the state and the taxpayer getting some of it back. I don't see there's anything bad about that. And in the best cases, like Nine Elms, you might get it all back. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take in Nine Elms, but we'll get there. TfL will get there eventually, won't they? Which is fine.
But the synergy, Peter, you refer to is, I mean, use another example, where we're doing it in Peterborough, for instance, where we've got a plan there to exactly do that. So to try and put money back into rail and infrastructure, but also to deliver regeneration. And I think that is definitely the model that, certainly in the property business, under your sort of stewardship, that we are very much progressing. Robert, you got a question?
Thank you, Robin. Robert Gordon-Clark, LCA. Peter, you both touched on Euston briefly, you've mentioned it, and obviously the recent reports that the King will invest in Euston now, so therefore it'll probably all be sorted out, but or the Crown Estate certainly. But on a serious point, can you say a bit more about where you think Euston is at the moment, Peter, and where you hope it might be in the next couple of years? And I appreciate if the answer is no, I can't say anything, that's fine, but a little bit more on Euston would be lovely if possible.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, Euston... Euston has had its own problems, both with recently with the Sunak government claiming that the HS2 shouldn't go there at all. That's really unhelpful. This government's righted that wrong, because why would you build a high-speed railway to Birmingham if it didn't go to the centre of London? And then the issue about if you only build to Birmingham, what's the rest of the capacity of the railway used for? What sort of trains does it take? And where does it go? So they're all difficult railway factors. I think currently Euston's in a place. I'm not sure the King's investing in this personally. Actually, that's just the headlines. Yeah, I like Duchy ice cream, but it's not quite the same as and the biscuits. So look, the announcement that Crown Estate are joining Lend-Lease is must be a good thing actually. So that is good, and that confirms Lend-Lease as the development partner. The multiple organisations who all have to buy into a plan for Euston are, in my view, much closer together on it than they've been. I chaired the partnership for 5 years, and it was pretty hard going to begin with, because there were quite a lot of people who couldn't see why they were there, or have very differing views about what the site should be used for. I think that we are coming to a place at which the spatial plan is working itself through. I think the aspirations for the station are now realistic. The HS2 station, when I got there, was unbelievably going to have air-conditioned platforms. Not even in Saudi Arabia do railway stations have air-conditioned platforms. That was an overspec. The design after it turned out to cost $4 billion. Looked like an Eastern European railway station after the Germans had retreated. It was sort of scaffolding poles with corrugated iron roofs on it. That's no good either. And I think what we're going to get out is an integrated station concourse of both the conventional station HS2. We're going to get a pretty substantial degree of commercial space there. We'll get housing space north of the station, which is where it ought to be. We'll get a decent bus station and taxi facilities, maybe not as much as TfL would ideally want. We need a tube station that doesn't keep closing because it's too full. We need Camden to agree. We need the Mayor to agree. We need Lend-Lease and Crown Estates to agree. We need Network Rail to agree. We need the train operators to agree. And we need TfL and LU to agree. And I think we're going to get there. And then we need a methodology of delivery, and we're working that through too. So I'm quite hopeful, actually. And the other point is that why wouldn't it in the end be a success? Simply because it's the largest amount of potential development in central London at the moment, and there's no Lend-Lease go around saying, and I'm sure they would say if they were here, actually if one of the previous schemes of commercial development had been built already, they would have let the lot to life sciences people, because it's just down the road from the crick and so on. So I think we will get there. It's been a long old journey, but we're much more aligned than we were. And actually, Network Rail's got its own part to play, because the place you can build highest and longest is on the eastern side, down Eversholt Street. I refuse to believe that isn't viable. I just need somebody to prove it, to put it in part of the scheme. But we'll get there, and I just met the leader of Camden. He could tell you. I think we're aligned, aren't we? Yeah, there you are. We're aligned. We probably couldn't have said that at least 3 years ago. So that's good, isn't it? Good. There you go.
That's great. Very good answer. Any more questions from the floor? Any more? Okay, I've got one. Only yesterday, obviously, the Great North Initiative was announced, the mayors working together, obviously run by Kim McGuinness, who we know well, obviously, on our Newcastle project. Obviously, a bit like we talked about Euston, that more people sometimes makes things, it's a good way of enabling stuff, getting everybody at the table, but also, it can also be difficult when you've got more than less at the table. Do you think this is I'm assuming this is a good thing, and what else can we do, whether that's in government or through Network Rail, to sort of promote these sorts of regional alliances?
So it must be a good thing, actually, because combined authority mayors getting together and sorting out for themselves what they most want. They're never all going to agree, because they will undoubtedly all have their own special favoured plan. But I think one of the strengths of it is that if the big cities and towns in the north get together, you're more likely to get potential projects out of this that really make a difference in housing and in homes and in commercial space than otherwise. And we at the department will pay very close attention to what they want delivered. And hopefully they can express some view about the priority in which they want it, because that's part of the issue. I mean, Transport for the North has been a great organisation, but it's been pretty sadly hampered by the fact that it's 20-something local authorities, and they've never been able to express a preference for what they want the most, and that's really quite hard. At TfL, we ran, as some of you know, an investment plan that did rank things in order, and they changed, and some of them got done and they were taken off. Some of them would never get done, and some of them moved because of the political importance and because people put some money in. And I think it's really helpful to have the mayors of the principal cities outside London working together, because they can sort out some of those differences, and they can also learn from each other about how to get on with the railway and transport providers to get some answers they want, actually.
Agree entirely. Have we got time for one more question? Is there another question from the floor? You've answered. Look at that. You've answered everyone's questions, Peter. Then I've got a final one. Just obviously, in some of the big schemes that we've touched on in the last sort of half an hour, what's the biggest lesson or lessons that you take away from pulling together sort of the Olympic in 2012 or York Central? How would you try and do some things differently, or get people or partnerships to work differently?
I don't think I'll do any of it differently. I think what you have to do is to get all the right people in the room and then just be bloody persistent. Actually, never give up. We had our own. I just think that's how you get it done, and you'll find on occasions with some of these that actually there are parties who should be leaning in a bit more than they do. And what you have to do quietly is to go around the back door and get them to lean in. Otherwise, nothing will happen. And I think that is the answer. There's no silver bullet to this stuff. I do remember once, actually there was a short period in 2011 where people kept saying to me, when are you going to bring in the team of brilliant people to do the Olympics? And I just said, listen, if you can't do it with the people you've got already, you're sung, can't you? Actually, the trick is to get the people who are there, who've got an interest in the outcome, just working together. I don't think it was that difficult, actually. I think York went from something that everybody thought had potential that looked too difficult to something where everybody thought, yeah, let's get on with it, We've even managed to nearly shut Lehman Road, which is, that we ought to have a ceremony, not for the first vehicle on the new road, but for the last bloody vehicle on the old one. My God, that's taken some doing, but we'll get there, won't we? Brilliant.
We will. And I think, I echo what Peter said. I think that to me there's a balance here, isn't there, between making sure everyone's got something in it, there's some skin in the game, therefore you've got vested interests, and everybody gets something, but not everything they want. When everyone's getting everything, nothing ever happens. It doesn't happen. So just by way of just finishing, just wanted to say a huge thank you, Peter, as I know your incredibly busy schedule and diary, getting busier by the day, for sharing your sort of amazing insight given by the amount of volume of people we have in the room. But the sort of the appetite I see increasingly in what we're trying to unlock or trying to invest in, right the way across the UK. The obvious question is, will there be a Peter Hendy tour around the UK that we can buy tickets for later?
I can't get out of the Lords. Actually, it's really difficult. I get all these invitations to go to impossible places, and I'd really like to do it, but I can't. But look, I think the thing is, Robin, that actually I have great hopes for the reform of the railway, because what you all need to deal with is people who understand what the point of the railway is and what it's for, will deliver the services that create wealth and jobs and homes, and actually have a bit of time left to work out what the railway is doing in urban centres and how it can do it better. And I'm really quite optimistic about that, and I'm also optimistic for a change that what you'll see. Heidi and I are going to Bournemouth on Thursday to launch the public ownership of South Western Railway, which starts on the following Sunday when I'll be on holiday, so I can't be on the first train, which is just as well because it's 06:11 from Waterloo to Strawberry Hill, and I can't get up there early. But what I'm hoping you'll see is as we do this, you'll start to see some people who are in charge of the railway. So Lawrence Bowman, who will be in charge of the South Western, when he wakes up in the morning, everything that's gone wrong with South Western will be his fault. There's nowhere else to go. It's his bloody job to fix it. And if I could do that in TfL for 9.5 years, he can do it on a little railway like the South Western. And what I want him to do is to understand not only what the railway does for its customers and how important it is to run, but have a bit of time left to engage with local authorities, with MPs and others about what else the railway can do, so that the railway becomes part of the community and it isn't talking to itself about what went wrong yesterday and whose fault it was. And I think that's really, really important. And I'm so looking forward to that. For me, nobody asked it, but for me that's much more important than what GBR looks like at a corporate level, that you find somebody who's in charge of pieces of the railway for whom the buck stops with them. That's what GBR ought to deliver. Forget where, there will be a corporate headquarters and it will be in Derby and there'll be all sorts of important people appointed to it at the top. But I want to see people who represent the railway at a route and regional level, who understand what people want from it and try to deliver it. That's what I want, because that's what I did at TfL, and it didn't quite kill me, but my hair's gone grey and I drink a lot. But actually that's what I want on the railway, and I think we'll get there. Thanks, Robin.
Amazing. Thank you, Peter.